Kong's new territories, a vast fertile tract of land lying between Kowloon in the south and the Shenzhen River and China in the north. Its people, indigenous Cantonese or Hakka, have traditionally made their livelihood from subsistence farming and fishing. In recent years, however, due to the rapid urbanization of the area, many have left the land, moved to the city or migrated overseas. Those that remain, mainly tenant farmers, are probably the last generation that will make their living the old way. Family homesteads are also disappearing, and with them many of the crafts that once prospered under their roofs. But progress has also brought prosperity on a scale unimagined by many of the territory's older inhabitants. The once abundant wildlife has suffered somewhat at the hands of the agriculturalists. However, in recent years, sanctuaries have been established, and now the bird life, at least, has some chance of survival. Due to the close proximity of China and the Shenzhen economic zone, a large amount of cross-border trade takes place, much of it being carried by the Kowloon Canton Railway. Louvre is the northern railhead for the new territories, and it's from here that more than 70 passenger trains a day heading south to Hong Kong commence their journeys, as well as many freight and other through trains from China. The Kowloon Canton Railway, or KCR, has been travelling this route for 80 years. And although rolling stock shapes and sizes have changed, the railway alignment through the countryside is basically the same as it was when the railway first opened in 1910. In those days, journey time south to Kowloon took approximately an hour and a half. Today, it takes 40 minutes. The relationship between the KCR and the new territories for the first 60 years at least has been largely symbiotic, growth being mutually beneficial and parallel. However, some of the changes that have taken place here during the last 2 decades have been so phenomenal that it's taken radical measures to enable the infrastructure to keep up with the population growth. Traditionally, the new territories has always been Hong Kong's food basket, but with imported produce being competitively priced, crops such as rice have virtually disappeared. The fertile paddies now nurture the more profitable vegetables. Small settlements that remained unchanged for 50 years are today virtually unrecognizable. Places such as Tai Po have been transformed from a fishing village into a high-rise new town housing 250,000 people, all within a decade. The new towns have enabled a third of Hong Kong's population to live in a rural area while enjoying the conveniences of modern city life. Hundreds of factories have been set up on industrial estates manufacturing everything from crafts to high-tech and anything in between, continuing the Hong Kong tradition of cottage industry alongside the multinational. With the territory having 50,000 establishments in the manufacturing sector alone, a myriad of articles find their way into the marketplace, leaving little doubt why Hong Kong is considered the enterprise center of the world. Aside from bringing employment to the area, the new town factories have to a certain extent alleviated some of the intense overcrowding previously associated with the industrial areas of Kowloon. The versatile and dexterous workers being vital to the many labor-intensive industries. Because of the relatively lower rents in the new territories, some of the older, more traditional crafts, which would have otherwise died out or moved to China, have been able to survive here. Some of the smaller factories, which are generally family concerns, employ only a few people. It's in these family factories that many items are still handcrafted, some of the manufacturing techniques going back generations. On the southern approaches of Tolo Harbour lie the beginnings of Sha Tin district. The first of the new towns to be built, it's grown to be one of the new territory's major residential and industrial areas, and has been inspirational in the development of many other new towns. The new territories ends at the Beacon Hill Tunnel. And on the other side, Kowloon, where the railway terminates at Hong Kong Station, which handles a fair portion of the 500,000 passengers a day using the KCR system. The freight yards located adjacent to the terminal see much of the 3.5 million tons of inbound freight from China each year. Until 1975, Kowloon Station was located in Tsim Sha Tsui, the only relic now left being the clock tower. The origins of the KCR actually go back to 1898, when a concession was obtained by the British and China Corporation to build a railway between Kowloon and Canton, construction on the British section starting in 1906. Working conditions for the engineers and labourers were difficult, accommodation and workshops having to be built on site. Malaria and dysentery were rife, and the decomposed granite through which some of the tunnels passed required heavy timbering. Bricks were used in the construction of some of the bridges, these being manufactured locally and fired in specially built kilns. Opened on the 1st of October 1910, the 35-kilometre-long single-track railway cost the Hong Kong government £1.3 million. The inauguration ceremony starting in Tsim Sha Tsui and then moving up to the border at Lo Wu. Amongst the dignitaries at the event was the then Colonial Secretary, Sir Henry May, and Mr. Wei Han, General Manager of the Chinese Canton Railway. In those days, the border post was a simple affair. 2 mat sheds with guards and flagpoles. As completed in 1910, the KCR started in Tsim Sha Tsui, then went northwards to Ya Ma Tei, through the Beacon Hill Tunnel to Sha Tin, along the coast to Tai Po and Tai Po Market, then on to Fanling and the Chinese border, where it was to join up with the Canton Railway, which was also under construction. In 1912, a narrow-gauge branch line was constructed from Fanling to Chateau Coq, but this was unprofitable and was closed in 1928 due to competition from a newly opened motor road. The railway served the colony well through the 20s and 30s, and although there was prosperity in Hong Kong, little changed in the lifestyle of the new territories. Victoria on Hong Kong Island just before the war was undoubtedly one of the most spectacular cities in the world. The waterfront bustling with activity, rickshaws keenly touting for business. The tenement areas alive with energetic children. Even the architecture of the central business district was considered amongst the foremost in the region. The tram ride up to the peak was inspirational, to say the least. And the vista as impressive as always. But all was not well. The war, which had thus far remained in Europe, was soon to engulf the colony. On the 8th of December 1941, the same day Pearl Harbor was bombed, the Japanese attacked. After some fierce fighting, the defenders were forced to surrender 2 weeks later, on Christmas Day. Many Allied prisoners were taken, and the territory fell into decline. The occupation was to last for 3 years, 8 months, and during this time, trade virtually disappeared. Currency lost its value, and the KCR, under the Japanese, could only muster a very limited service. In the post-war years, much of the population who had fled to China during the occupation returned to the territory, and things began to pick up. In the late 40s, as the nationalist government faced defeat at the hands of the communists across the border, the territory received an additional influx of people unparalleled in its history. Hundreds of thousands of people entered the colony during the early 50s, swelling the population to over 2.5 million. At the time, Kowloon Station in Tsim Sha Tsui not only served as a busy gateway for the new territories in Kowloon, but because of its close proximity to the ferries, for Hong Kong Island as well. The railway was also the most convenient link with the north, as the road system through the new territories was not well developed at the time. On average, the KCR carried around 15,000 passengers a day, with gross earnings of some $7 million annually, $2 million coming from its freight service. Like many railways around the world at the time, the KCR's efficient and cost-effective steam locomotives were still the mainstay for hauling passengers and freight. A locomotive pulling out of Kowloon Station under full power was a majestic sight and epitomized the romance of train travel. For until 1949, it had been possible to travel from Hong Kong to Europe by train using the Trans-Siberian Railway. All in all, the KCR's association with steam lasted 50 years. But by 1962, diesel locomotives had replaced steam entirely. Hong Kong was fully industrialized, with the immigration from China continuing. Although the government was forced to try and curtail this great influx of people, most measures just seemed to strengthen the resolve of the émigrés to make it to the territory. In the early 70s, under the then governor, Sir Murray MacLehose, one of the largest resettlement and housing programs in the world began. This called for massive infrastructural development of the new territories, including the building of public and private housing estates. Also incorporated in the plan was the modernization of the KCR. At this stage, the railway was carrying 14 million passengers and hauling 1.5 million tons of freight annually. Gross railway receipts were some $30 million and expenses $22 million. With passenger patronage already on the rise, the railway could never possibly cope with the projected figures that would result from the development taking place in the new territories. A major limiting factor was the single-track line, which could only handle 24 passenger trains per 18-hour day. So by the late 70s, a $3.5 billion redevelopment program for the railway was implemented. Included in this was double-tracking the entire line up to the border, demolishing and rebuilding existing stations, adding new ones, and electrification. Apart from the rebuilding program, there was also the decision taken in 1982 to change the status of the KCR from a government department to a public statutory body. Because of the double tracking, some of the smaller tunnels had to be opened up to form cuttings, and a new 2.3-kilometre Beacon Hill tunnel was built in close proximity to the old one. Some of the old landmarks also had to go. Mongkok Station was demolished to make way for a whole new complex. And all of this, including the laying of new tracks, had to be done without disrupting normal railway operations. New rolling stock, the value of $500 million was ordered, and a driver retraining program introduced. A completely new railway control system, which included coloured light signalling, train describer equipment, and a fully automatic warning system, was built for the KCR in the UK. Much of this being installed at the new control centre in Hong Kong. Today, trains operate at 3-minute intervals on busy sections of the line, and patronage has grown to over 170 million passengers annually. The railway operates from 5:45 in the morning until midnight, 7 days a week, in all conditions except in the severest typhoons. Freight is also a good earner for the corporation, accounting for some 10% of gross annual revenue. Inbound freight is just over 3 million tonnes and outbound some 1 million tonnes annually, the most commonly carried commodities being textile fibre, yarn and foodstuffs. But there are also hundreds of other essential items brought in every day to keep the territory running. 2 million livestock are also carried by the KCR every year, including pigs and cattle, but the railway also carries poultry and live fish. By special arrangement with the Guangzhou Railway Administration, the corporation also operates a non-stop through train service to that city. The busiest section of the railway is between Kowloon and Sha Tin. Sha Tin, the first of the new towns, is where the KCR bases its operations. The all-important administrative, maintenance and stabling facilities all being located close at hand. To cope with its expanding needs, the corporation recently took delivery of its 100th three-car unit, with further cars still on order. Human resource development has also become increasingly important, with the recruitment and training of new staff being vital for future continuity. Because of the railway's base in Sha Tin, it actively participates in many community events, such as the Dragon Boat Festival held during the summer. In common with many other organizations, the KCR fields a team, the event becoming increasingly popular. Aside from transporting 500,000 New Territories residents to and from work and school every day, the railway also serves the community's countless recreational and cultural transport needs, carrying city people to the Chi Kung Temple in Sha Tin, for example. This much-revered 100-year-old temple honors a much-loved and respected army general, Chi Kung, who lived in the area towards the end of the Ming dynasty. The temple, which receives over 200,000 devotees a year, is said to bring good fortune and wealth to those that worship here. A spin of the copper wheel could change your fortune, as can beating the temple drum. Another attraction in Sha Tin, where one's fortune counts, is racing. During the horse racing season between September and June, the railway lays on an additional 70 trains and carries 30 to 40,000 punters per race meeting on a specially built line to and from the Royal Hong Kong Jockey Club's racetrack. Then, of course, there are the festive occasions, when the railway is used for evening travel to the city, during the Mid-Autumn Festival, for example. This festival, which falls on the 15th day of the 8th lunar month, and the heat of the summer begins to fade, is very colourful, and because of the lanterns, is much loved by the children. There's also a busy time for the KCR during Christmas, when the many Santas ride around the new territories in style. During Chinese New Year, practically the whole of Hong Kong tries to leave the territory, most going to China, many travelling by the KCR. Kowloon Station fairly bustles with activity as more than 100,000 people pass through the turnstiles every day heading north. On average, an additional 20 trains a day have to be laid on, and sometimes this is not enough. Even with the railway operating at peak capacity, standing room only has become somewhat of a tradition for train travel through the new territories during Chinese New Year. Similarly, the border station at Louvre is virtually swamped with people crossing to and from China during this holiday period. Another busy time for northbound trains is in early April each year during Qingming. Qingming has its origins as a celebration of nature's emergence from winter, but it has now more to do with ancestor worship. In the vicinity of Fanling is the Wuhopshek Cemetery, where many thousands pay homage to their ancestors during Qingming. And on this one day each year, all roads to and from the area are virtually impassable. Train travel is almost mandatory. The sweeping of graves, the burning of incense and paper money, the offerings of food and libations of wine are all part of the ritual through which the living pay their respects to the dead. With many decades of participation in community events such as Qingming, the KCR has become very much part of the new territory's lifestyle, and it would now be difficult to imagine the area without it. Indeed, to celebrate its 80 years service, the KCR recently undertook the renovation of 3 veteran passenger coaches, one dating as far back as 1910 when the railway first opened. After total refurbishment, the 3 coaches together with 2 long-serving diesel locomotives went into service for one special day. At a simple ceremony at Kowloon Station, the corporation honoured its longest-serving member and invited dignitaries, press and public alike to undertake a nostalgic journey in remembrance of how things once were. With almost a century of railway experience upon which to build, the KCR can confidently look forward to further growth and development while continuing to serve the Hong Kong community long into the future.
Stay tuned now as Man and